Does the preseason need to be revamped? Is Miami's run just over? And Paul George avoids disaster, but should there still be fear in Philly? It's all right now on the Locked On NBA podcast.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, welcome back to the Locked On NBA podcast, where we are here. It's rotating hosts all week long, but we've got you on these Wednesdays. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm John Karalis, host of the Locked On Celtics podcast. You find me on Twitter at John_Karalis.
And I'm Jake Madison, host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast, on Twitter at NolaJake.
Excited. Both our teams played in the preseason here. We'll talk about a preseason revamp. We'll talk about Miami in the second segment, Paul George in the third segment. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download that Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase of last-minute tickets. Thank you so much for subscribing. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and do so. Get into that YouTube page, subscribe there. Get into the comment section. Let us know what you're thinking about all of this stuff. And I just want to start with the preseason, where I watched the Boston Celtics and the Toronto Raptors in a weird back and forth game where Al Horford played his only game of the preseason. Celtics played 5 preseason games. Al Horford only played 1. 2 of those games were in Abu Dhabi, and this game was their third in 4 nights. A weird preseason schedule. You look across the league, some games had everybody play, and this was like a last-minute tune-up. Some games had nobody play. It's hard to tell when guys are playing, when they're not. People are still paying their money for these tickets. We have all of this consternation about guys don't play. You know, people pay money for regular season. They pay money for preseason tickets. And to me, Jake, the preseason is a mess. So let's just throw this question out right away. Does the NBA need to take control? Does the NBA need to take charge? Do we need to revamp and set a regular schedule for this preseason and do away with all of this craziness that the teams are involved in?
So I go back and forth on this. So one thing that's worth noting is like teams control their preseason schedule. It's not like the NBA regular season schedule where the league makes it, sends it out. They take things into account. Like teams kind of schedule their own games. They coordinate everything. And it's just kind of more or less that. So when you see like one team maybe play like 4 or 5 preseason games, another one play 3 or so, that's kind of on the team's choice. And I was originally going to come in and agree with you and be like, yeah, they need to revamp all of this. But as I've been thinking more about it, like, no, I don't. Let the teams choose what they want to do. If they don't want to play preseason games for whatever reason, maybe they're cheap, maybe they just don't want to put their hand for what they're going to do in the regular season. I don't know. Let them. Like, it's better than I'd rather them play fewer games than just be like, here's a bunch of guys that are on our training camp 20-man roster that are never going to make the right regular season roster. Go watch them play for 48 minutes, and you got to pay full price for your drinks and food.
Look, first of all, I want to give Tim Bontemps credit because he had said recently on the Hoop Collective podcast, there's I forget what his schedule was, but preseason should be a week of practice, like a couple of 3 games, a week to get ready, and then you start the regular season earlier, and you use that time to eliminate some back-to-backs. And I think it's just a pretty smart way to approach this, because as we're moving forward, I think all of these pro sports are understanding that preseason is less and less important. It used to be, and I remember I was just actually talking to Cedric Maxwell, former finals MVP, Celtics great, has his number retired. He does the radio call for the Celtics. And I asked him, hey, Max, how many games did you guys play in the preseason? He's like, oh, man, we played like 8 or 9. We would go out west and have a West Coast swing, which is just horrible. But back then, guys came into camp out of shape. You needed those games to play yourself into shape. Now, in today's NBA, if you come into camp using camp to get yourself into shape, you're screwed. And you're
behind the 8 ball then.
You're way behind. If you don't come into camp ready, cardiovascularly ready, physically ready, you are way behind and you will get criticized. You will get slammed by everybody. So that takes away a big part of what preseason was just there for. And some teams need the time. They're not all the Boston Celtics where everybody's just running it back. There are teams that need time to put in things, test concepts, play games to see those concepts in action. But also, those teams are generally speaking not going for regular season wins. So a couple of those regular season games where you're like, well, we wish we had more time to work on this. It doesn't really matter as much. So my whole point there is, with the guys coming in already in shape, take that week out of the preseason, standardize the schedule a little bit, and use that extra week to cut down those back-to-backs in the regular season. I love that plan.
Yeah, like I said, I could go either way. Like, I look at the Pelicans, who need to play Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson together, and in preseason didn't do it at all. Zion didn't play the final game. Ingram did. Ingram didn't play the first two. And it's like, I literally just recorded my show about this, being like, I don't know what to make of this team right now because we didn't get to see it in preseason. But clearly they don't think they need it, right? Like, they're supposedly going to go with small ball Herb at the 5 as their starting center. They started Daniel Tice their three preseason games. Like, is that what they should have done? Is that not what they should have done? Was this all part of the plan? Was it just due to like circumstances? Like, preseason's just so weird, isn't it? Like, there's just kind of no getting around. Like, should I read too much into that or not? And that's kind of the big question. So if you standardize it, does it remove some of that uncertainty around things, or are teams just going to mail it in even more since they're like, oh, well, we're being forced to play an extra game that we just don't want to do, so who cares, and we're not going to take it seriously? That's why I kind of the mindset of like, yeah, let each team make whatever they want to of preseason. Like, you're not going to see anyone schedule a big West Coast road trip anymore, so I don't think you need to worry about like that. But if a team's like, yeah, we don't need it, I don't know, don't make them play those games.
But like, look at the Celtics. The Celtics just played 3 games in 4 nights. So they ran their regulars in 1. They played nobody of consequence necessarily, very few players of consequence in the second one. Okay, that's nice for Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser, who are regulars, but like they're not in situations where they will be in the regular season. Pritchard and Hauser play next to Tatum and Brown, etc. And that's what they're going to have for 82 games plus however long their playoff run is. So what the hell is them getting starter minutes and playing? You're not executing an offense. You're not doing anything of real substance. But the Celtics did this for whatever reason, right? Because probably they have those 2 games in Abu Dhabi. They wanted to bunch these games up to get them out of the way so they can have a week off, play a bunch of games that don't matter, and then have another week off to get ready for the one game that does matter, season opener against the New York Knicks. But what about, where's the outcry for the fans in those 3 games that are paying they're paying for tickets? Why aren't people worried about those fans?
I mean, I think when it comes to preseason, let each team do what they want, but like price it accordingly, right? Like, preseason needs to basically be free at this point. If you're going to play guys that aren't going to be on your regular season roster and play them significant minutes, like, the prices need to be adjusted for the fans here. And it mainly impacts season ticket holders, right? Like, they've got to pay for these. That's part of the deal. Got other fans who don't have season tickets either know what they're getting into, and tickets are like generally pretty cheap for the preseason anyway. So it's kind of that. The big takeaway from this right now, kind of talking with you here, is like, don't read too much into preseason. 0-4, 4-0. Like, don't read too much into that because it's so weird.
It is weird. It is weird. And so, yeah, if then that just solidifies my point to me. If you're going to play a bunch of games where you don't get anything out of it, and we can't figure out why do they exist? Then
don't schedule them. That no one's making them. They get to choose.
Well, you have to play some. You have to play some. Team can't go out there and be like, hey, you know what? We're just going to sit out this preseason. You can't do that. You have to play.
No, you can probably schedule like the minimum of 4 and then kind of move on. There's some teams that do more than that, and that's their choice. But
all right,
yeah, I don't know. Maybe just make it so they don't have to. I don't know.
I think I standardize it, move the regular season up a little bit, and just make it so there are fewer back-to-backs. It's the best plan. So let's just do that. Let's finally just do that already, so we don't have to like kill ourselves over games that are just meaningless, completely meaningless. But hey, look, we'll see. Miami Heat played in a game that maybe meant something to them because they're trying to figure out themselves and make another run to a championship. Are they a win now team, or is their run over? Interesting comments from Stan Van Gundy, jumping off those when we come back. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And they're the #1 sports book because all you got to do is place your first $5 bet and you get 200 in bonus bets. No matter what happens to that $5 bet, we hope it wins, but if it doesn't, no big deal. Those $200 in bonus bets are guaranteed. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com and sign up now. Place that first $5 bet. If you're doing it when you in the middle of a game, maybe you get a hunch watching a game, you say, I'm ready to make that bet now. You can open up the app. You can check where you place your bets. They have the live stats there, the live play-by-play. Confirm your hunch, place your bet. Super, super easy. It gets you a big return there on FanDuel. Use the tools that are there. Set your limits, set your budget, so you're just having some fun with your disposable income. Don't go overboard. That's no fun. Just have some fun over there at FanDuel. We all want you to do that at America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Go check out all of our team shows. So we're talking about Locked On Heat right now. We're talking about the Heat right now, so go check out Locked On Heat. I did my post-Celtics podcast. Check out Locked On Celtics. Jake just recorded Locked On Pelicans. We've got a team podcast for everybody. Subscribe there. Make that your second listen after Locked On NBA. Jake, Stan Van Gundy talking on a conference call, talked about the Miami Heat and said, quote, I really don't understand what's going on there. They're really a win now team, which I respect, and they haven't put a roster around there that has a chance. I think they got lulled into a false sense of security by the run to the finals 2 years ago. So, Jake?
Is this real or fake? Just ask John and Jake.
The Miami Heat were bamboozled, duped, falling into the trap of their we'll call it, I don't know what you want to call it, their run to the finals a couple years ago. They aren't actual contenders. They aren't where a team that just went to the finals a couple years ago should be. They are actually done and should treat themselves like they are done. Real or fake, Jake?
Okay, so this actually requires a slightly more nuanced answer. From what Stan Van Gundy is saying, this is real. I don't see them as a title contender this year. They tend to overachieve. That's maybe where they're kind of diluting themselves, but they're known as a team that likes to reload, restock on talent. Star players want to go there, right? The biggest signs they've had the past couple of years are Goran Dragic and Terry Rozier. This is not like the Miami Heat where it's star level players like waiting to line up and go there when LeBron James and Chris Bosh did it. It's just, when Jimmy Butler forced his way there. That hasn't happened. It's probably more due to the collective bargaining agreement than anything else. But it just, look, if they were still the Miami Heat, they would have done something like that right now. And now they're kind of attached to an aging Jimmy Butler who will take you far, but is a little bit tough to rely on. And I think it's less that, they got to the finals and diluted themselves. I think it's also like Eric Spoelstra. Dude's the best coach in the league, or one of the best coaches in the league. We all agree. He makes teams overachieve. He probably is hiding a lot of the flaws by the coaching that he does, but eventually talent is going to win out or catch up to you if you don't have it. And that's kind of what we've seen from the Miami Heat. They've massively overachieved the past couple of years. And I don't think any of those years, even when they were in the finals, we looked at them and was like, oh yeah, they're like right there. They could have won that series or something like that. So for that reason, I say it's real that they're done.
Yeah, I think you hit on the point. The point that I was going to make is that they may just be relying too much on Eric Spoelstra, and we all just default to Spo's the best coach in the league because he makes the most out of whatever he has. Doesn't matter. And that run a couple of years ago is kind of solidified that notion for Spoelstra, that with Caleb Martin and those guys, they got a little bit of fool's gold. There are guys who were not great shooters that became Steph Curry for stretches, and that's fine. Like that's going to happen sometimes in these runs. But when you've got Spo and you've got an owner that historically has not exactly been the biggest spender, like Mickey Arison has, I mean, they've paid the tax some, but they have historically kind of resisted paying the tax. They're not out there just spending to keep teams together. And that's what has made them, to their credit, they have found quote unquote scrap heap guys. They've found these guys at the end of drafts and undrafted, and they've become just great players. It's a credit to their scouting department. But at some point the talent wins, and at some point the magic only goes so far. Like Spo, it's kind of like the Simpsons when Marge finds the Chanel dress at the outlet store, and she keep turning it into like a different dress, like 4 or 5 different dresses. Eventually it falls apart. Like I think they've made all the dresses they can out of this. And we're at a point now where Jimmy Butler has to try to take the regular season seriously, something he hasn't done in the past couple of years. He has to try to take the regular season seriously, because if you don't, you can't count on Miami to get past the top teams, Boston, Philly, which we'll talk about in a minute, Milwaukee, New York. Milwaukee wouldn't be favored against any of those teams. You kind of want to have some sort of favorable seeding. So I agree that Miami, while still good and while still having maybe the best or at least a top 2 or 3 defensive player in the NBA, and Bam Adebayo, and some really nice pieces, and I like Jaime Jaquez. I think they've got some good young talent. They may have kind of overstepped that feeling of like, okay, we're going to go one more time with it. I think they might have miscalculated there a little bit, and should probably lean a little bit more into a rebuild.
Yeah, I think it was telling when they didn't get Damian Lillard a year ago, right? Like that's where Dame wanted to go, and like they still couldn't pull it off for whatever reason. And maybe that was them relying on some of those guys that got hot in the playoffs, not wanting to part with some of those players. Maybe it was just they don't have the assets like they once did, or the draw isn't as strong. And then all of a sudden, he goes to a rival team in the Milwaukee Bucks. It's interesting to look at the Miami Heat, I think, and the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks had that run to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple of years ago. And we're like, oh, we're right there. Let's go in. They went and got DeJounte Murray, and like that didn't work out at all. And it turns out they were not nearly as far ahead as they thought they were. And it was just kind of a favorable playoff run that took like a bad Ben Simmons bounce and all of that stuff in there to like, elevate them. And they kind of learned the wrong lessons from it. And it feels like maybe the Miami Heat, because of Eric Spoelstra, have learned the wrong roster building lessons over the past couple of years. And then Spoelstra keeps working his magic, and you're like, oh, they're still so close. But when you kind of start to like really think about it, it feels like they're further away than they really are.
Whoops, sorry, muted my mic. You also have playoff Jimmy Butler, who for a few seasons was able to coast and carry them, and I think that has kind of gone away. Like, I don't think playoff Jimmy is kind of there anymore. He breaks down too easily now. He can't find it the same way he used to find it. You just look at, like, they play the San Antonio Spurs here on Tuesday night. This is the type of thing that you kind of have to rely on for them to win these games. And I'm not going to go too nuts of them beating the Spurs by 3, but Bam Adebayo, 20 points, going 2 of 3 from 3. Can you get Bam Adebayo to be more of a stretch big? You look at that and you say, oh, that could be a nice development. You get Jaquez with 15 points off the bench, playing, pretty well. You get, the Tyler Hero stuff. Like, is he part of their future? Is he not? Is he a trade chip? There are a lot of things that are kind of pulling them in two different directions. You get Terry Rozier. He got hurt last year. Is he an answer? Is he not? You can go with trading some guys, or you can go with keeping some guys. And I'm just not sure they even know where they want to go. We might actually see them in the middle of this season make a decision depending on how this thing turns out. I mean, Miami could be a team to watch in February if the regular season goes worse than they think, if they have injuries and they are fighting for a play-in. At some point you got to cut bait. So maybe the end result of all of this is Miami is at the trade deadline saying, okay, fine. Tyler Hero's up for bids. Duncan Robinson's up for bids.
All-in move. Like, go make that all-in move that we've been waiting for them to do for a minute. Like, go get a Brandon Ingram or someone like that. But they just don't seem to want to pull the trigger on something like that.
Nice try,
maybe a little
Jake.
bit of like projecting.
Nice try. Yeah,
he was good. He was good tonight. He was good in preseason.
Sure,
18 points on 13 shot attempts.
If your all-in move is Brandon Ingram, then you should be rebuilding. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. All right. Let's go to the Philadelphia 76ers, who, Paul George narrowly avoids disaster, but should there still be fear in Philly? We'll talk about that next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I've used Game Time to get tickets. I went to a Red Sox game. Very easy to use Game Time. And they have a thing called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to your favorite team, not just your favorite team, maybe your favorite musical group, maybe your favorite show, maybe there's something in town, a comedian's in town, you didn't realize, like, I want to go see this person. Game Time has these last minute tickets, and with Game Time Picks, they filter out all the fluff, so you get incredible deals on great seats. If you turn on the all-in pricing feature, that number you see is the number you're going to pay. And speaking of things you see, panoramic view. Right there on the app, as you scroll through, you go, I don't like this view. I do like this view. I'm going to check this out. And you don't have to worry about making sure you get the best price because they have the lowest price guarantee. If for some reason you find this ticket somewhere else for less, Game Time, because they have the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, they will credit you 110% of the difference to make sure you get the lowest price. It's very simple. You take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time and this Game Time Picks feature. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. It's the name of this show, LOCKED, Locked On NBA, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Paul George suffered a bone bruise when it looked like when he fell, his knee bent away. A knee shouldn't bend. And even though it was a minor injury, just thinking about seeing it bend that way, I hate it. It's that and sprained ankles. They are not the most serious of injuries, but watching a piece of the body like do what those things do, like, oh, God, and I've sprained my ankle like 20 times. So good news for Paul George, just the bone bruise, reevaluated in a week. So if you do, like Jake, we were talking about this before the show, you do the Jake Madison math, reevaluated in a week means probably another week off. Not so bad for Philly. That probably, at maybe worst case scenario, you miss a few games. Miss the Milwaukee Bucks on opening night, the Toronto Raptors, the Indiana Pacers. Okay, couple of rivals, all Eastern Conference games. You don't want to be behind the 8 ball that early in the season, but you still have Joel Embiid. None of these are back-to-back. You still have Tyrese, Maxey. You still have a lot of good players. So I guess the first thing, Jake, is a sense of relief in Philly.
Yeah, I think so. That injury looked pretty scary, and knowing Paul George, though he was healthy last year, does have, a lot of missed games over the past couple of years. So to see that it's only a bone bruise, that they're going to rule him out for a week, which I think will mean 2 weeks. It's like, as you'd said, it's a week, then you're reevaluated, then there's a short little ramp up period, then they play you. Like, they avoided a big issue here. And even if he misses the first week and a half of the regular season, those first 4 games, if they go 2-2, that's probably kind of the expected part for them, right? You're going to beat Toronto. You're going to beat Detroit. You have 2 other tough games in there. 2-2 is good as long as you get him back before they play Memphis and then go on a small West Coast trip where it's Phoenix, the Clippers, the Lakers. I think there's another team in there. That's where you want them to be fully healthy. And as long as he's back for those 3 games right there, that's, I think, well, they'll tank this any day of the week, I think. And it then puts, my one concern is it puts a little bit more pressure if he misses some games early on in the year to be healthy at the end of the year. And if he's banged up, is he going to force himself to play? That's where it kind of becomes a little bit of a question. But overall, this is about as good as it could have been for Philadelphia, I think.
But this is where the fear thing comes in for me. Because if you're a Philadelphia fan, you're looking at this team and saying, this is a good team. This is a team that can win a championship. We know who the favorites are, but the Sixers winning a championship is not an out of the blue surprise this season. No. But it requires everybody to be healthy, and it requires people who have historically not been healthy to be so. And I would say from a Philly perspective, you're already with this. So we're starting the season already with Paul George. Thank God that it was only a bone bruise, because it looked like it could have been much worse, but there's an awkward landing already for Paul George. This is such a fine line for them to toe. I can't help but feel like every one of these little things makes a Philly fan just go, oh God, oh no. I would be nervous.
Well, there's some there's PTSD from all the Embiid injuries and everything, and kind of what it's done for them. And then the lack of a good seed going into the playoffs kind of messing them up at times, I think. So yeah, I think when it comes to, he was their big offseason acquisition. We have very high expectations for the Philadelphia 76ers. If Embiid misses time, you were going to at least have Paul George and Maxey out there on the court, and that's going to kind of save you, whereas that team has looked not great when they're missing Embiid. At least this is kind of some insurance against that. But if he's out too, that's a disaster for them.
Yeah, that's right. Because now if he's out for any extended time, the back-to-back thing, you're now without both of those guys. I would not expect Embiid to break the no back-to-back promise. So what are you leaning on? It's a whole lot of Kelly Oubre, maybe some Gershon Yabusele. They have enough depth to kind of manage through some of this, but it's good news for Paul George, but it's also scary news for Philadelphia, because it's already starting. And
Andre Drummond to the rescue, right?
The best rebounder ever. The best damn rebounder we've ever seen.
Yeah, according to him.
According to Andre Drummond, he's the best damn rebounder we've ever seen. So I don't know. Philly is not quite in that Miami conversation that we're talking about, because as long as you have Joel Embiid, you have a chance. But I don't know, you've got a few years of these guys, right? I think it's Paul George is on a 4-year deal. So you've got the next 4 years of Maxey, George, and Embiid, but this is the year, or maybe next year is the year. This little 2-year window is it. If you can't get it done now, and if Paul George is already getting hurt, I'm just saying, at some point, a tough discussion is going to have to be had. So I don't know. I just leave it at that. It's not that discussion's not happening this season, but It's closer than people think. We just said it with Miami Heat. You got to make sure your timing is right with these discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. But I think it's just one of those things that if you're a fan of Philly, you're just like, oh, great, it's starting already.
Yeah.
Like now, before the regular season starts, that's not a great feeling to be in, even if ultimately this injury isn't going to be that big of a deal. But I don't know. It makes you just nervous, I think, for that team.
Makes you nervous. But you know what calms people down? Subscribing to the Locked On NBA podcast, because we got you covered every day, Monday through Friday. We got you covered. The big stories, even when there's no stories, we'll find the stories. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, and watch the show on YouTube on Wednesdays. I'm your host, one of your co-hosts, John Karalis, host of the Locked On Celtics podcast. Find me on Twitter at John_Karalis.
And I'm Jake Madison, host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast, on Twitter at NolaJake.
Now, get into that YouTube page, get into the comment section, and then share the podcast. Tell everybody they should be listening to and watching the Locked On NBA podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.